Hi guys, it's so good to see you again. Today we're outside because it's nice out. Pardon, my dog wants to go inside. So it's nice out, so I'm gonna do our lecture out here today. So last week we talked about food chains and food webs. This week we're gonna look a little bit deeper into how all of these things interact with each other. So this week is gonna be focused on niches and communities. So what is a niche? I know we talked about it a little bit in class, but we're gonna go back over it and we're gonna look at the definition. So a niche is a range of physical and biological conditions in which a species lives and the way the species gets what it needs to survive and reproduce. So in a little more plain terms, a niche is just tolerance to survive. It's based on the resources and the habitat that an organism is in. Okay? So, for example, if you have two organisms in an ecosystem that eat the exact same thing, they're gonna have to compete for that resource. There's not enough of it for both of them to have it. So we're gonna talk about that. We're gonna go a little bit more in depth with what competition even means. Okay, so in biology, competition is when organisms attempt to use the same limited resources in the same place and at the same time. Okay? And you have two types of competition. You have intra-specific competition, so within, and that's between members of the same species. And then the second type is interspecific competition, and that is between members of different species. So competition leads to this thing that we call the competitive exclusion principle. Okay? And this just means that no two species can occupy the same niche in the same habitat at the same time. Okay? You're okay. I know. So when we have competition, we see something that we call the competitive exclusion principle. And this just means that no two organisms or species can share the same niche in the same habitat at the same time. One of those species is always going to outcompete the other. So for example, if you just have a little petri dish with some bacteria and you have two species of bacteria in that same culture, one of them is going to outcompete the other. It's going to be better at getting those resources and reproducing, and the other one is going to be shut out. It's not going to be able to get those resources. Okay? So this is what we call the competitive exclusion principle. Because of the competitive exclusion principle, we see members of the same species divide their resources. So an example of this is you have a tree, right? There's a tree somewhere. 3 birds of the same species might feed at different levels of that tree. So one might be towards the bottom, one will feed more in the middle, and one will go to the top. So this ensures that these birds don't have competition between those resources, and they have their own niche, their own spot to go to get the resources that they need. So something that we looked at last week with our food webs is that all of the organisms in an ecosystem interact with one another. They all have relationships with each other between what they eat and what eats them. So we're going to go over some of those relationships, okay? So the first one we're going to talk about is predator-prey. So this is the relationship between a predator and its prey, right? One organism eats another. So an example is a lion eating a zebra, okay? And predators can affect the population and the size of a prey population, also where they eat and where they go to get their resources. So there's something, I'm gonna throw a picture up on the screen now of a predator-prey cycle. So you can see in this graph that as the predator population goes up, the prey population is going down, and vice versa. As the prey population starts to go back up, the predator population goes down, and it cycles between these two. Because as the predator eats more of its prey, you have less prey to eat. So your numbers are going to drop. And if the predator's numbers are dropping, the prey doesn't have anything eating it, so it can increase. And then it just goes back and forth, and this is called the predator-prey cycle. Alright, so the second type of relationship we have is herbivory. So this is how herbivores interact with plants. So an example would be a cow eating grass or a deer eating grass, any type of herbivore that's eating some plants. And herbivores can affect the size and the distribution of a plant population. So if we're in the woods and a deer eats some type of plant that has seeds and it walks somewhere else, it will then deposit those seeds somewhere else and allow that plant population to expand. So a lot of plants depend on herbivores to distribute their seeds and bring them somewhere else so that they can expand their population. Alright, so the next one is a keystone species. This is a species that is vital to an ecosystem's stability, and changes in this species could cause dramatic changes in the ecosystem. And we saw some of this. I'm gonna let the cars pass.
Yeah, those are loud cars.
Stay home. All right. So changes in this species can cause dramatic changes in the ecosystem. So an example would be a sea otter that eats sea urchins, that eats kelp. If all of those sea otters go away, the whole ecosystem is going to be affected. So we kind of saw examples of this when we did our food webs and our food chains last week. If you take out one of those species, it could affect the entire population and cause really big changes. So keystone species are very, very important to the ecosystems that they're in. Okay, so the last thing we're going to talk about is symbiosis. And this word, symbiosis, it just means living together. Can you think of another time in this class that we've talked about symbiosis or something that kind of sounds like that? It's when we talked about the endosymbiotic theory. Okay? So we've kind of heard this word before. Now we kind of know what it means, living together. Okay? And this is just different relationships between species. And we have 3 types of symbiotic relationships. So the first one is mutualism. And this is when both species involved benefit. So an example that a lot of people use is clownfish and sea anemone. Okay? There's so many cars! People need to go home! So an example that a lot of people use is clownfish and sea anemone. So sea anemone, for a lot of other fish, when they go into it, they get stung. It hurts them. But clownfish secrete it's like mucus, it's a layer that helps them go in and out without getting stung by the sea anemone. And in return, the clownfish will eat some of the littler organisms that try to get in and hurt the sea anemone. So both of these organisms are benefiting. The clownfish gets a place to stay, and sea anemone gets some protection. Mutualism, both are benefiting. Alright, so the second type of symbiotic relationship is commensalism. Now, we don't see this one often, and a lot of times that we do see it, there's situations in which it could turn into a different type of relationship. So this one's rare, we don't see it often, but this is when one organism is benefiting and the other organism isn't really affected. They don't really care. So an example of this one is sometimes there are barnacles that are on boats or ducks or things like that, but they can also attach themselves to whales. Now, for the whale, they're not really affected, but for the barnacle, they're getting travel from one place to another, and they're also getting some food. As those small organisms are coming over the whale, they can get some of that food. So the whale isn't really affected, it's just swimming around, and it's just, barnacles just kind of chilling on them. But for the barnacle, it's getting food and it's getting transport. So one of these organisms is benefiting, one isn't benefited or hurt. So that's commensalism. So the last type of symbiotic relationship is parasitism. And this is when one organism lives in or on another and harms the other organism. It rarely kills it, but it harms it. So examples of this are fleas, ticks, lice, parasites in intestines, leeches, any of those types of things that live on or in another organism are parasites, and they have a relationship with the other organism, and that's parasitism. Okay, so the three that we talked about: mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. Okay, so we're going to go through, I'm going to present you guys with some scenarios, and I just want you to think about whether they are mutualism, commensalism, or parasitism. Okay, so here we go. Alright guys, so I have some examples here. I'm going to say the examples out loud. You think about what relationship you think they are, and then at the end we'll go over them. Okay? So the first example is a tick living on a deer. So do you think this is mutualism, commensalism, or parasitism? Okay, a tick living on a deer. Okay, number 2 is a bee eating a flower's nectar and picking up pollen. Okay, a bee eating a flower's nectar and picking up pollen. Do you think that is mutualism, commensalism, or parasitism? Okay. So the third example is a barnacle on a whale. Do you think this is mutualism, commensalism, parasitism? The fourth one is a tapeworm living in a person's intestines. Okay? A tapeworm in a person's intestines. Alright guys, so the last example is an aphid providing food to an ant in exchange for protection. Okay? An aphid providing food to an ant in exchange for protection. Alright, so now we're going to go back through and we're going to go over the answers for these. If you got them wrong, maybe try to rewind the video a bit and rewatch those sections and try it again. If you got them right, good job, and I hope that the rest of this week goes well for you. Okay, so the first one, parasitism. Number 2, mutualism. 3 was commensalism. 4, parasitism, and 5 was mutualism. Okay, so like I said, if you got these wrong, maybe try to rewind the video, watch that section again, and then try it over. And if you're still confused after that, join office hours, ask me some questions, maybe I can try to explain it to you a little differently. I hope that you guys are doing well. I hope you're finding ways to get outside and enjoy nature a little bit. And I miss you guys, and I cannot wait to see you either during office hours or next week. Bye.